The next edition of It's About Money, we'll have our guest Dan Beerse, who's an author of a children's chapter book series called The Adventures of Drew and Ellie. Be sure to stay tuned for this wonderful program coming up. Hello and welcome to another edition of It's About Money. I'm Nannette Nocon and thank you for joining us. Today we have a wonderful program lined up and our guest is Dan Beerse, who is the author of children's chapter books, The Adventures of Drew and Ellie. And he is also the owner of a publishing company called TMD Enterprises. So Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you being here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And I know that you also go by your pen name, Charles Nolan.
Yes.
So what made you decide to have a pen name and not use your actual name?
Good question. I think a lot of authors, when they first start out, are a little unsure about how it's going to go. Many famous authors have used a pen name, so when I looked it up and saw the good reasons why, I thought, well, I'll use a pen name. And I did it for personal and professional reasons. Mm-hmm. So my pen name is Charles Nolan. I see. So if people look you up, they have to look up Charles Nolan rather than Dan Beerse. So, But thank you for being here. I really appreciate that. Now, tell us about the chapter books, The Adventures of Drew and Ellie. What is it about? It's a chapter book series about a little boy who's about 7 and his younger sister, Ellie. And they discover through an event that happens with some hand-me-down clothes. Ellie gets a dress that suddenly is more than just beautiful and sparkly. It's got some magical properties. And as the two become comfortable with exploring what this dress and the properties can do, they encounter certain challenges. And I wrote the series primarily to get kids to develop their problem-solving skills and also to give parents and educators a means to assist them in character development.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. Now, have you always been a storyteller? What got you? I mean, did you start out as a writer? Or I know you had a different profession before.
Yeah, my professional career path has varied in a lot of different directions. My formal education is engineering, so I was a design engineer for a few years. So the creativity aspect has always been there, and as a kid, I loved reading stories, and I have a wonderful imagination, so I could always imagine certain things, and I used to make up stories in my head. When I had a paper route as a young man, I used to just daydream walking around the paper route with different story elements. So I think it was probably a logical expression to finally get to a place where I was putting these stories down on paper.
That's great. That's exciting. So what made you make that transition from being a design engineer to an author?
Well, the transition was, there was a few more careers in between there, but I reached a point, I'm the oldest of 6 children, and I have a lot of nieces and nephews, so I had a fair amount of time reading children's books. And I always thought to myself that some of the stories, which were very good, I thought, boy, they're so simple. I could have written this, which I'm sure a lot of people think sometimes. Mm-hmm. So about 7 years ago, I had met some children that I found to be an inspiration for characters. And one afternoon, a story for my first book, The Magical Dress, kind of popped into my head. And I thought, you know, I think it's about time I pursue this. I'd always had it on the back burner, and I thought that maybe this was about the time I should try it.
So for inspiring authors who are watching our show, you have to really be inspired to be an author, right? I mean, you just can't sit down and say, okay, I'm going to write.
Well, if you talk to a lot of artists, you'll find that, you know, the muse is there when it's there, and sometimes people can tap into it, which is great. But I just found that day when the story kind of hit me that maybe the time was right to pursue this, just to see what happens. And so that was another reason to choose a pen name. So I tried it, and I was pleasantly surprised with the response I got from children. So before I knew it, I had the idea for a second book, and you know.
That's great. So you have a little fan club.
Yeah, I'd like to think I do, but I do, yes.
That's wonderful. So now, how do you market your book? You know, this program is about money. We talk about ways of income, expenses, things like that. But, you know, here, like, there's a lot of people, I'm sure, who've thought of becoming authors, but there's quite a challenge in generating income as an author. I mean, how do you make it work? How do you market the book? Because it could be a brilliant book, but without the marketing end of it, no one would know about it.
Yes, that's probably the $64,000 question, is how to do that. When I was younger, my parents always had the saying that if you build a better mousetrap, people will beat a path to your door. And I realize now they won't if they don't know you have it. Mm-hmm. So the greatest challenge is how to let the public know about the stories or about whatever it is, the product or service that you have to offer. For me, word of mouth is a very powerful form of advertising with parents, with kids. I find grandparents and parents do a good portion of my marketing, but it's important to get it further than the community. And so I built a website. I have my books out in mass distribution, so they're available through any major bookstore, on Amazon. And it's just continually referencing other people, you know, trying to get mentioned on a blog or something in the news, press releases. Marketing is a very challenging piece of any kind of business. And so I find the same challenges that I'm sure many people do with a business.
Right. And then, although the show will be aired at different times here, you have a busy time of the year with the books, right?
This right now is my busiest time before the holiday, because books are such a great present or a gift to give, and it doesn't matter what you happen to be celebrating. But I have a lot of different programs lined up in the fall with the Rochester Children's Book Festival and different signings and school visits, and so it is usually a very big time of year for me.
So I imagine that, like you said, book signings is a great way for the kids to know about the book.
Exactly. I recently did a book signing here in Penfield at the Wegmans location on 441, and that was very well attended. So, and the people at Wegmans were wonderful, giving me the time and the space for that.
Oh, fantastic. So it's really neat for the children to meet the author, get a personalized copy with an autograph. That's great. What's your target market? What age group is that?
The target age group is between kids ages 5 to 9. So when I go into schools and present, I've done kindergarten all the way through 6th grade, but the sweet spot seems to be 1st through 3rd grade. Those are the primary kids that can identify, I think, with the characters and the situations.
And then by 3rd grade, they could really read the book themselves.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah, so.
But I have a lot of younger children, even pre-K4, and kindergartners love to be read too. So
yeah, right. And it's what's neat about the book. A book, you know, you could read to the child, and then eventually they could read it. Themselves.
Yes, and the nice thing about a chapter book is because it's so short, you can read a chapter a night or a couple chapters a night, and each of my books can be read within 35 minutes.
I see, for each chapter.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. Now, as an author, I mean, there's a lot of authors are excited about, we have the idea that we would sell a lot of books as an author, right? Tell me about, I'm sure it was very exciting when you finally decided to publish. Like, you also migrated to being a self-publishing author.
Right.
Did you start out that way, or did you have a publisher to begin with?
Well, I did, but probably my engineering background forced me to do a little research on the publishing, you know, and what it takes to get that done. And for many people that want to be traditionally published, it can be a very long and arduous process. If you've never been published, it's very difficult to get an agent, and if you don't have an agent, it's very difficult to have a name brand publisher look at you. So, not to say that it can't be done, but the odds are stacked typically against you that way. And if you do manage to line up an agent and then get a traditional publisher to look at you, the time frame for that can be easily 18 months to 2.5 years. So I'm not a very patient person, so I originally looked into some of the publishing services. One of the big buzzwords that's been around for a while is POD, or printing on demand. With the digital revolution, now it's easy to print a book one book at a time versus printing them off a offset press at a run of 3,000 or 4,000 at a time. So with that concept, it opened up the avenue for anybody really to be an author. Of course, there's a big difference between printing a book and having the book come out looking professional and good and sounding right. So there's a lot of elements that go into that. You know, the editing and book design and cover design. So I learned all about that. But shortly after I used a publishing service, I was introduced to a friend of mine who convinced me to just form my own publishing company, since I was already doing most of it myself. And being an entrepreneur at heart, I decided to take that step.
That's great. And TMD Enterprises is your publishing company.
Yes, it is.
That's great. It's wonderful. So you really started from, you know, how to think about the concept of the story all the way down to publishing. Now, when you decided to publish, did the excitement of getting started as an author and as a publisher kind of get in the way of the financials of the project?
I did mention I was a little impatient. So yeah, I was eager to get my book. I originally came up with the idea in August of 2003, and so I was, you know, green and wet behind the ears. I thought, oh, I can get this out by Christmas time. I was pleasantly surprised to find out that the process, even doing it yourself, there's a learning curve. And I'd made some financial mistakes that I suppose if I had to go back and do it again, the reality of my answer is I would do it the same way, because it gave me the foundation for being able to make better decisions. Sure. And so, you know, the cost of that learning experience was well worth what I gained from it. So sure. Now when I consult with authors, I try to temper their impatience a little and explain to them that the process takes some time. Yeah, just be patient, it'll happen. Yes. Right, yeah. That's right, because, you know, as a publisher, I imagine that if you had some books that you had to store it, you could possibly be paying for storage fees and all that. Oh, yeah. Yes, there's storage. And it's not just any kind of storage, because books are made of paper, and paper likes a particular type of environment. You know, dampness and moisture paper don't go well. So you need to have almost a controlled storage environment, which changes, you know, it's not like you can put it in your garage, or unless your garage happens to be heated. So,
right, that's right.
You know, it needs to be a warehouse where there's, you know, temperature controlled.
So there's the authoring of the book, there's marketing the book, and then you have to send the books out. I mean, with your website, people can order the books, right?
Correct.
And then do you also, do you farm out the sending of the book? I mean, because you have your own website that you could sell your books, and it's at a discounted price.
Correct.
Compared to getting it from the larger distribution.
Right.
Places, right? And how does someone ordering a book, I know I ordered your books and it's wonderful, the process went very smoothly. How do you handle sending the books out?
Currently, right now, I along with a partner, do my own fulfillment. If it got to, I wanted to try that without hiring a company to do that. There are many companies that will do fulfillment, but I wanted to start small with that just to see how that would go. And if I could no longer handle the demand, then I would farm that out.
No, that's great. It's smart to do it, and then you understand how the process goes and see what kind of wrinkles there might be. That's very smart. So, you've done. Did you know that you were going to end up writing 5 books so far? When you started out writing the first?
I really didn't. The first story, The Magical Dress, kind of popped into my head, and as I was writing it, I found myself thinking about another adventure, and so I guess I looked into the idea of a chapter book. Okay. Because chapter books are pretty popular, and so I started that, and before I knew it, I just finished the 5th book this last fall, and I still have other ideas, so I'll continue writing them until I don't.
Yeah, sure, it's great. It's kind of like, I mean, although female, Nancy Drew had a bunch of books, right? Right. I mean, I know, based on my age, that's kind of the books that were around.
Well, I read the Hardy Boys, and I got a lot of inspiration from them, because I like the way the brothers and the friend worked together, how they were creative to solve some of their father's detective mysteries, and so I think that might have laid the foundation for some of the ideas that propel me when I write.
That's great. That's really exciting. What would you say is your biggest challenge as an author?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the biggest challenge is my audience are children, and I'm an adult now. And it's important to remember that how kids relate to each other, how they think, how they approach a challenge or a problem, and how they talk. So being removed a little bit from that particular age group, I constantly have to remember who they are. And when I was writing a couple of the stories, I found I keep writing the characters older and older and more mature. So I have to go in and kind of correct it and make them a little younger. I mean, I know for the most part they're precocious, but I have to remember who my readers are so that they can identify with the characters.
Because you keep them the same age in the
Yes.
different stories. It's not like they're growing older as you're writing the books.
Well, Ellie started out 4, but she quickly turned 5 because I was told that for a 4-year-old that precocious is very rare. So.
I got it. But she's going to stay around 5 years old.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We're going to take a quick break. I'm talking with Dan Beerse, who's also Charles Nolan, author of the books The Adventures of Drew and Ellie. Stay tuned.
Now, Krista, make sure you stay with her the whole time. She's new to the country. This is her first day. This is a brand new country. It's a whole different culture.
Gonna be okay.
Now, make sure you stay with her the whole time. I'll be here right after school to pick you up.
Okay, Mom.
Okay, have fun. Bye-bye.
Bye. Ignore my mom. She's so annoying. She's totally freaking out about this whole thing. She freaks out about everything. She always does that. Ugh. Ignore my mom. So, you ready for your first day in the wicked castle of doom? I mean, like, seriously, it's so boring. I don't know how they could put us through this, like, every single day. How many schools do you have in your village? None.
And we're back. I'm Nannette Nocon, and my guest today is Dan Beerse, who is the author, as Charles Nolan, of the books The Adventures of Drew and Ellie. So let's take a look at your books here. See, it's a really wonderful drawing here for a magical dress, and we'll show that on television here nicely. But you also came up, you are part of a million book challenge. Tell me about that.
Well, great, I will. When I became my own publisher, I realized that I now had a lot more flexibility. I controlled more of the pie, if you will. And so I enjoyed writing the stories so that I could promote literacy with children and hopefully leave some type of a legacy of stories that will inspire and maybe help kids a little bit. But I wanted to go another step. I kept having a vision of being able to help children outside my world in some other way. So with the formation of my own publishing company, I was able to form a humanitarian project called the Million Books Challenge. And the gentleman that does my website, we're kind of partners, and so I talked to him about it and created that whole project. And so 25% of all the books, or the money from the sale of each of my Drew and Ellie books, goes to fund the building of a school and community center in Kisumu, Kenya, for AIDS and HIV orphan children.
How nice. That's wonderful.
I chose that area because those kids, an education to them is the ticket out. To them, an education is like winning the lottery here. It's the only way they can rise above their situation. So they appreciate learning at a degree that I'm not sure many of us can appreciate, but I wanted to do something that way. So my books are helping kids here and another place on the planet.
Yes, that's wonderful. I mean, education, I think, is indeed the way out to from the circumstance that one's kind of laid out when they're young.
Yes.
So the more educated you are, that's great, because you're not only doing it in the U.S., but also bringing that to more of an underprivileged community.
Right.
Yeah, that's terrific. So you also have an illustrator for your books. And you've had a couple of illustrators, right?
Yes, I was fortunate when I started out. Of course, I had the story, and then the next part is how to find somebody to illustrate it. And I was given a lot of different advice, go to some of the local colleges, and we have some really great colleges here in Rochester. And I happen to remember a young woman that I had met several years prior who was very artistic. As a matter of fact, she's a graphic artist, and her name is Sherry Baker. And I approached her because I liked her style of drawing. She does a lot of pen and ink and watercolor, and I liked that very much. So I approached her, and it turns out that she had always wanted to illustrate a children's book.
Oh, wonderful.
So working with her, I created the word pictures and described everything, and the synergy was wonderful because when she presented me with the mock-up of the cover of the first book, I was so blown away by how that looked exactly like what I saw in my mind.
Oh, isn't that great?
Yeah, it was. And so I knew that I had found the right person.
Oh, that's great.
So she illustrated the first book, but for the second and third book, she wasn't available, which was kind of a bummer, but being the wonderful person that she is, she went and found somebody that she worked with that she knew could handle the transition, and so it was a gentleman named Tom Moyer, and he picked up where she left off and did books 2 and 3, and then for books 4 and 5, Sherry was able to come back and work with me again. So.
Oh, that's great. It's nice to have found the person who could help you.
Yes,
in your process.
I mean, I thought I'd have to go out and look for somebody new, but here's my substitute. So that was wonderful.
So in producing the books, selling the books, writing the books, you really have certain people who are part of your team. You've got an illustrator.
Right.
And then you've got somebody who's designed your website to help you market the book. But the other portions of it you've handled.
I have, interestingly enough, my cousin who is my webmaster, who creates all my websites. His sister is part of my creative team. She was an elementary school teacher and also a reading teacher. So I engaged her. We're very close, and I engaged her in the beginning with the manuscript from the first story to get some feedback of how it was going. And also being a mother, she was able to help me with getting the story believable and making it congruent and stuff. And her younger sister happens to be my editor. So I kind of keep it in the family a little bit. But between the three of them, they're an integral part of the team that I use to produce the books.
Oh, how fantastic is that?
It worked out great.
Because usually you have to go out and find other people, and here you know the people, you know the character, and you know they're reliable, and they're with you. That's fantastic. Now, as an author, what is your biggest reward? And as a publisher, what is your biggest reward?
As an author, I think the biggest reward is going into schools or doing readings where I get to share my stories with the children, the audience. And because it's my story, I can read it and with all the voice inflections and tonality that delivers exactly the experience I want. And when I see the kids react to that, and afterwards they get excited and they want to buy their own copies of the book, that is very, very rewarding.
Oh, that's terrific.
And as a publisher, I think I have been able to help some other authors now get started and see some of their work take form in the form of a book. And so that is very rewarding. And also, I think as a publisher, knowing that stories are timeless, and the book will be around much longer than I will. So it's kind of an interesting concept that, something copyrighted will be around 75 years after I'm gone.
Sure, right. That's great. That's fantastic. Now, what would you say is your biggest challenge?
I think my biggest challenge is probably just the marketing. I know that sometimes marketing can, the media likes, a certain angle. A little controversy isn't always a bad thing, and I've heard somebody say that sometimes you have to have a little smoke before you have a fire. But, my books are not necessarily controversial, and I find getting them out there and just making people aware that they're available is probably the greatest challenge. Because when people do read about them or find them, they love them, they enjoy them. And so I have some very steady followers who keep buying the books for their kids and for their grandkids.
No, that's
so
great.
it's I think, you know, marketing is probably the greatest challenge.
I see. Now, in a perfect world, you as an author and a publisher and a philanthropist, what would be the most ideal scenario for you?
Besides getting on Oprah?
Yeah, there you go.
I think the most ideal thing would be just, you know, letting as many people know about the books and the project as possible. I have found that I have tapped into some people that were surprised that there was a you know, humanitarian project connected with the books, and eagerly agreed to buy the books because they could see the win-win all the way around. They could share in the experience of promoting literacy with these books, giving them away, and they could also see the benefit of, you know, helping kids outside this environment. So I think in a perfect world, it would just be able to tell everybody, as many people as possible, about the books and the Million Books Challenge.
That's great. Now, what would your advice be for somebody who wants to write a book, to author a book? What advice would you say? Do you think that self-publishing is something that most people should be looking at? And what would be your words of wisdom?
I belong to a writing group here in Rochester, and I also belong to a small critique group of writers. And I would encourage anybody who wants to write, first, write. Just do it. The technology today allows anybody to be their own author, but I also encourage them to look exactly at what their goals are. If their goal is to be traditionally published by, you know, a large name publisher, then pursue that. Don't give up, you know, keep at it. Eventually, persistence will overcome resistance, and you will find a publisher to do that. But if you have a book or a story that you want to get the message out, it's more important to get your story into the hands of the readers that you're targeting. Then I would tell them to entertain the idea of going either to a small independent publisher, using a good quality publishing service, or self-publishing.
I see. That's great. And then with regard to if they're self-publishing, there's some words of caution that people should have.
Yeah, I think probably I would have to caution people. There are a lot of publishing services out there that will help you self-publish. The most important thing to keep in mind if you're becoming a publisher is whoever owns the ISBN, International Standard Book Number, really is the publisher. And there's a lot of, I don't want to use the word deception, but there's some trickiness with that. There are some less than reputable publishing services that are only interested in taking your money and printing whatever you have. And like anything, you know, if you look at it like a copier, if you put a lousy copy on a copier, it's going to produce a lousy copy.
Sure.
The more you invest in building and creating the book and crafting it, the better the product will be.
Sure. Well, it's been a delight talking with you, Dan.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
So we'll be putting your website on our screen and showing a couple of the copies of the books on the screen here, and people ought to check it out and see your books.
Absolutely.
And hopefully we have viewers right now who recognize your book and be able to say, yeah, I know the story of the magical dress and all the other stories and the adventures of Drew and Ellie.
Yes.
So thank you. Best wishes to you.
Thank you very much.
May hopefully when I run into you again on the program that we would have a dozen books here.
Yes, well, that's the goal. Keep writing.
That's great. Well, thank you, our viewers, for joining us today. I'm Nannette Nocon. It's About Money. Our guest today is Dan Beerse, who is Charles Nolan, the author of The Adventures of Drew and Ellie. Take care. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you have any questions for It's About Money, please email Nannette at nnocon@aol.com. This program was produced through Penfield Community Television in Penfield, New York.